Welcome to our final episode of Crescent City Crime for 2022, dear listeners. I'm Tracy.
And I'm Brian.
And everybody, I just wanted to let you guys know, everybody listening, that we so deeply appreciate your support throughout our first year of podcasting. Spotify gave us a nice little rap video and it brought us a lot of joy. For some reason, this wrapped video says that we have 93% more content than other creators in our category on the platform that we use. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I do believe most podcasters actually aren't as active as we are.
Yeah.
I do say most. Okay, now keep in mind podcasters who get noticed. The majority of podcasters don't really get noticed on a national level. You see,
that's true. But we are trying to we are still living the dream though. We are still podcasting, and we plan to do so much more in the future. And we really can't emphasize enough how much it means to us to have an audience, and we do look forward to bringing you more content.
Always. We enjoy having you listen.
Yes. Now, since it is my birthday month, I am going to be talking about a little bit about the psychology of true crime aficionados. And then after that, we are going to be taking a look into probably the most infamous cold case in American history. It is not a crime that took place in Louisiana, but it was definitely a crime that, it happened when I was a teenager, received national attention, and it really was one of my gateways into true crime, even though I was interested in it before that. But this was the case that really made me go, hey, I'm interested in this, which might sound a little morbid, but it is true. That is me. So the psychology of true crime aficionados, okay? There's a lot of reasons why we are interested in true crime, why we're drawn to this. Do you want to call it a genre? I really hate to call it an interest. I even hate to use the sentence, I love true crime, because it sounds kind of, it doesn't sound very good, does it?
It sounds rather sadistic.
It does.
Yeah.
So I would say, it's an interest, but it's not really a love. So the psychology of true crime watchers by actual experts, though, does reveal some interesting reasons why we're drawn to these stories. Curiosity about what drives people to do the unthinkable. We all have a dark side, and I would say that most of us are a light gray, right? Different shades of gray in between that light and the dark. And maybe that's why so many of us are obsessed with the sinister doings of others.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
The author of A Voice Out of Nowhere, Inside the Mind of a Mass Murderer, Janice Holly Booth, seems to agree with me. She also suggests that our fascination with true crime stories may be representative of our curiosity about the inner workings of the mind. That's definitely a part of it for me. We want to deconstruct the mystery, because humans, or at least humans that possess a sense of curiosity. I'm a very curious person. I'm also a very nosy person. And true crime is sticking my nose into other people's business. It really is. Not just me, though. Anybody who watches a true crime documentary or listens to a podcast or whatever, we're curious and we're nosy. Wouldn't you agree, Brian?
Yes, definitely. Yes. Your reasons for, your curiosity about true crime is the same reason why I've, read about and studied the Nazi regime.
Yes, because you're interested in those inner workings of what could cause people to follow that ideal.
Yes, and I'm interested. I've always been interested in understanding evil.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, you want to understand evil. That's another reason why people like us are drawn to true crime stories.
Yeah, what to look out for.
What to look out for. We're going to get there.
Yeah.
But we also want to preserve our belief in justice. We want to have a sense of chaos, and let's be honest, we want to see the bad guys get caught.
Yeah, we want to see them get what's coming to them.
We really do. Yeah, we want to see justice. We want to see somebody go to court, go to jail. We want to see the perp walk.
We want to see the victims avenged.
We want to see the victims avenged. We want to see the families be able to... I don't ever want to
find closure.
Well, they actually say that you never really find closure when you're a part of a situation like that. But what I would think is that they can maybe move on as best they can, learn how to live with it, and getting a sense of justice would, at least I hope it makes it easier for the people who are left behind in these situations. And true crime stories also allow us to search for a sense of understanding so that the world doesn't feel so chaotic. And we're also drawn to the adrenaline of fear. There are plenty of fictional books, movies, and TV shows devoted to evoking horror and fright responses, and true crime is no different. Professor of sociology and criminology Scott Bond says the public is drawn to these stories because they trigger the most basic and powerful emotion in all of us, and that is fear. So while the actions of a serial killer may be horrible to behold, we really can't look away due to the thrill of the spectacle. And it also allows us to experience fear and horror in a controlled environment where the threat is there, but it's not real to us.
Like a horror movie, or like going into a haunted house.
Exactly like that. And most interestingly, this is the most interesting reason that I find, is that we're driven by our own longing for survival. We want to know what's out there, but rather than fear being the prime motivator, it might be something closer to a general longing for safety. True crime, it can make us feel like we're in the know. It can make us feel safe. And fear drives us to learn as much as we can to preserve our own safety. That's why true crime appeals to our natural instincts to survive and eases our fears about the same thing happening to us. We're trying to spot patterns of behavior.
Yeah, it is a good bit of it is about learning how to protect yourself.
A lot of it is learning how to protect yourself. And this may explain why women are more likely to follow true crime stories than men. More often than not, the victims in these stories chronicled by true crime shows are women. And in terms of preventing being the victim of a crime, women have more to gain compared to men in this regard.
Yeah, women are more likely to become victims of crime than men.
Yes, and
typically.
And women want to know these true crime stories in part to learn how to avoid being a victim. And it can teach us to be prepared in case we're ever in such a situation. Now, like I said earlier, I wouldn't use the word like or love about true crime. I'm interested in history, the world in general, sociology, and the inner workings of people. And I really don't think that my time is wasted by learning about true crime either.
No, it's at the very least, it's intriguing.
It is. And I think part of the reason why I've always gravitated to these stories is because I want to know more about what happens to us in death, violent attacks, self-defense, legal cases, etc. It's, for me, it's a the more you know sort of situation, right?
Uh-huh.
The more knowledge you have, the better armed you are.
Knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power. However, the dark side of this is that if you overly consume these stories, it can have an effect on you. So my advice is that as soon as you're finished listening to this podcast, go listen to something happy or go watch a comedy movie, something. don't make true crime the only thing that you read or watch or listen to. That is my advice, and I think it's good advice.
Yes, it can make you pretty jaded.
It really can.
Especially if you have personal experience involving the criminal justice system. A metropolitan police officer who makes a career of it is definitely going to become extremely jaded and very likely not even going to want to live in the city. Retired in the city, and they probably already, by the time they retire, they probably already have a home outside the city.
We have known that to happen to a few people we know personally.
Yeah, including members of my own family.
Including members of your own family, that's true.
In police work. We're talking people who are all New Orleans police officers, and none of them have retired to Orleans Parish.
Right.
Or in many cases, not even Jefferson, the adjacent Jefferson Parish.
Right.
Because that being considered too close.
That's and it's not specific to New Orleans. I've heard about this happening in other major cities. Miami police officers, for instance.
It has a lot to do with the officer spending so much time in police work in the city that they're experiencing the worst aspects of the city. They're in contact with the worst people that city has to offer on a regular basis. So it's natural that when you leave police work, you want to be away from all of that.
Yes, but you also want to, if you're not retired yet, you want to be able to commute easily to your job. And Jefferson Parish is actually not far from Orleans Parish at all. So,
yeah, Jefferson Parish basically is largely, a domicile for many people who work in New Orleans. And anyone who works in Metairie is quite simply providing services for people domiciled in Jefferson Parish but working in New Orleans. Right. It's all connected to New Orleans.
It
no
is.
matter what anyone who lives and works in Jefferson Parish will say.
So with all that in mind, we're about to dig into the meat of the episode right after we take this quick break. Brian, we are going to hop into our not so long ago machine. We're going to Christmas 1996. Back then, the 24-hour news cycle was nothing like it is today, and typically the week between Christmas and New Year's, stories were slow to break. But not this story. It started with a panicked phone call from the home of Patsy and John Ramsey in Boulder, Colorado to 911 emergency services, stating that their daughter, JonBenet, was missing, and that story was picked up upon quickly. And why, do you ask? Well, I think it's because as humans, we love beautiful things. JonBenet Ramsey was a beautiful little child. The mom was beautiful. The family was very wealthy. Had a nice home. All the things that us average Joes dream of having, right?
Yeah, they practically owned the town.
They did practically own the town. And now let's start with the Ramseys themselves. On the 6th of August, 1990 in Atlanta, Georgia, JonBenet was born to Patsy and John Ramsey. And with her mother's training, JonBenet started to compete in children's beauty contests from an early age, and she won multiple titles, including Little Miss Colorado Sunburst in 1995. And I'm so not into the pageant scene at all, so I have no idea of the significance of Little Miss Colorado Sunburst, but I'm assuming that was an important thing in the beauty pageant circles.
I think it's. How old was she then?
I believe she was 5 when she won that title.
Yeah, that's pretty pathetic to put that kind of pressure onto a 5-year-old.
The mother bleached her hair even. Which,
yeah, I mean, I can't help but think that that's like being treated like
a Barbie doll,
or being treated like a dog.
Yeah.
A 5-year-old shouldn't be treated like a dog. It's the kind of stuff you do to a dog. It's rather disgusting.
Well, Patsy,
a 5-year-old in a beauty pageant.
Yeah, well, Patsy was born Patricia Paw in 1956, and she was a former pageant performer herself. She won Miss West Virginia in 1977. She attended West Virginia University. She graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism in 1978. 2 years later, Patsy married John, and their son Burke was born in 1987. John was 13 years older than Patsy. He was born in 1943 in Nebraska and joined the Navy in 1966 as a Civil Engineer Corps officer. Before meeting Patsy, John had already had 3 grown-up children with his ex-wife, but that marriage ended when John had an affair with a coworker. But that didn't really slow him down, because in 1989 he formed the Advanced Product Group, which later merged with several other companies to become Access Graphics, a computer services company that became a subsidiary of aerospace, defense, and technologies industry giant Lockheed Martin. He was given the role of CEO and the president of Access Graphics, and this made him a millionaire. After the birth of JonBenet, the family moved to Boulder, Colorado in 1991. The family owned 2 private jets, a yacht, and a holiday home in Michigan, and also maintained a home in Atlanta. So they had a lot of assets.
Yeah, he managed to feed quite nicely off of the public trough.
Yes, he did. Yes. Now, Patsy was seemingly devoted to JonBenet and Burke, but she also devoted herself to building a relationship with her stepdaughters. She threw them lavish birthday parties and seemed to enjoy being where she was in life. She was a socialite. You know, she the ladies who lunch crowd.
Oh, yes, of course.
And, of course, as mentioned earlier, she put herself in charge of JonBenet's beauty pageantry. There are videos around of JonBenet singing and dancing, and, I mean, I admit it is kind of cute. But I also find the child beauty pageants kind of creepy.
Yeah, it's very exploitive.
Yeah, it is very exploitive, and, I mean, you can enter your children in a beauty pageant, I mean, when they're not even a month old, which seems especially weird to me when you say, well, that baby's not as cute as this other baby. That baby's ugly. I don't think there's any such thing as an ugly baby.
Yeah, baby pageant. I mean, what's so creepy about it is the baby has no idea what's going on.
You're right. The baby has no idea what's going on, and of course, as we will be discussing a little bit more in depth later on, these pageants are pedophile magnets. I mean, you see these very young girls posing provocatively, dancing a certain way, and, you know, while I look at it, I just feel weirded out, but to a certain other type of person, it's going to be something very interesting to them, and not in a good way.
Yeah, it to that person, and to the pedophile who enjoys that, they think they're playing innocent.
Yeah.
Because it's not child porn.
Right.
So they're trying to gain the same thrill from child pornography.
Yeah.
They're trying to sanitize their, sick interest.
Yes. Now, Christmas Eve, 1996, the Ramseys had an open house Christmas party, And on Christmas Day, the Ramsey family had spent the evening at home with their nearby friends, Fleet and Priscilla White. You believe that name, Fleet White? They returned home that night before 10 p.m., and JonBenet was put into bed. At 5:30 a.m. on the 26th of December, the family awoke to catch a private flight to their home in Michigan. Patsy went to start breakfast for the family, and a few steps from the bottom of the spiral staircase, she discovered a ransom note written to John and demanding $118,000 for the safe return of his daughter, JonBenet. It also told the Ramseys not to contact the police and that they would call them in between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. that day. The amount of money demanded was the same amount of money that John had received as a company bonus. Now, also, I just want to say that the amount is odd. $118,000. Like, why wouldn't you ask for $500,000, $200,000, $1 million? This is a very specific amount.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it also means inside knowledge.
We will get to that.
Of course.
We will get to that, absolutely. Police arrived at the Ramseys' home, and because it was a Christmas holiday, seasoned officers were at home, which left less experienced officers to deal with the situation. And in the meantime, the Ramseys called their friends, the Whites, to help with the search for JonBenet, and they also called in another couple friend of theirs. So there was at least 4 people in that house just going through the house that were not law enforcement. They were not experienced with crime scene contamination or any of that stuff. And they're also, they're touching things in the house. They're leaving fingerprints everywhere. DNA, hair samples, whatever. And we shed all the time. We shed skin cells. We shed hair. We put our fingers on something, we're going to leave fingerprints. So you have 4 extra people in that house doing all of this. Now, what do you make of this, Brian? I find this very weird.
Well, that is precisely what convinced some people, including conspiracy theorists, that the Ramseys themselves were responsible since they contaminated the crime scene. That people that resourceful, that smart, would not willfully contaminate a crime scene.
You're right.
But that, of course, that underplays the I guess you could say the psychological fog that gets created in such a situation where your family is victimized, and you're not necessarily going to think clearly.
That's true.
So this could have been something that could have been nothing more than people very under such anxiety and such emotion being irrational.
So you could argue that it was a natural reaction to the situation, them believing that their daughter was kidnapped.
Yes, and that they were looking,
or maybe needing emotional support.
Yeah.
So the friends arrived shortly after the police, and they were allowed to enter the house. And at around 7:30 a.m., John left to secure the ransom money for the kidnappers. Officer Rick French went into the basement and came to the wine cellar door that was secured by a wooden latch on the outside of the door. He paused for a moment, but walked away without opening it. He later said that he was looking for an exit route used by the kidnapper, which the closed latch ruled out. At 10 a.m., the police secured JonBenet's bedroom to keep it from contamination, and at around the same time, the FBI arrived to wiretap the Ramseys' phone. But at this point, the window of time the kidnappers had claimed they would contact them had closed, and they did not call them. The FBI left the scene shortly after, but left an additional officer with the Ramseys. Her name was Detective Linda Arndt. Oh, I'm sorry, no, different sentence. Detective Linda Arndt from Boulder Police Department suggested that John keep himself busy by searching the house. The house has 4 floors. This includes the basement, which spanned the entirety of the house. The basement was partitioned into several smaller rooms. A brand new train set was built on a table in its own space, and the children often played down there. It was also used for storage, filled with old paint cans, arts and crafts, and decorations. And there was a room to the northeast of the basement with a window that had a previously broken window pane. The pane had been broken for some time and it was never fixed, which is another thing I find weird. The claim is that John often locked himself out of the house, and this was an easy way for him to get in. But there's more weirdness about this window, which we'll get to later. The window is how police believe the kidnappers gained entry to the property, and a suitcase was positioned under the window, which was thought to have helped the intruders get back out of there. At 1 p.m., John Ramsey and Fleet White found JonBenet. According to Fleet White, John said, "Oh God," as soon as he opened the door, but before he turned on the light. And this was a room with no windows, so it was pretty dark in there. He ripped the tape off of JonBenet's mouth and carried her body upstairs and placed her on the floor. The police moved her body to a sofa where she remained until she was taken away by the coroner at around 8 p.m. John wrapped his daughter in a blanket, and she had a garrote tied around her neck with a paintbrush that had been used for leverage. And I know that many people listening to this will say, "Oh, John contaminated the crime scene." And yes, he did. But to me, this is not an unbelievable reaction to finding your dead child.
Removing tape from the mouth, of course. Mm-hmm. Removing anything that was binding the child.
Right.
Those are natural reactions.
Natural reactions. Yeah. Yes. The coroner concluded that JonBenet was killed by ligature strangulation and craniocerebral injuries. She had multiple abrasions to her neck, cheek, legs, and other body parts, and blood in her underwear. Her hymen was torn, and she had petechia, which indicates that she was alive during the strangulation. For those who don't know what petechia is, it's when the blood vessels in your eyes pop from being strangled. Unknown DNA was found beneath her fingernails, and an unidentified boot print was near her body. The garrote was made from a length of nylon cord, and the broken handle of a paintbrush was tied around the back and had been used to strangle her. Part of the paintbrush was found in a tub containing Patsy's art supplies, but the bottom third of it was never found, despite extensive searching of the house by the police in subsequent days. The evidence indicates that the tape was put on her mouth either after she was knocked unconscious from the blow to the head or after she had already died. An autopsy concluded that a stun gun might have been used to subdue her, and the wound on her head was 8 inches long. Now, a flashlight was found in the home, and it's in the crime scene photos, that fits the head wound. The blow to the head is thought to have knocked her into deep unconsciousness, which could have led someone to believe that she was dead. The strangulation came 45 minutes to 2 hours after the head strike, based on the swelling of the brain. And while the head wound would have eventually killed her had there not been treatment, the strangulation was her actual cause of death. Based on evidence of prior damage to her vagina and hymen, some thought there was evidence of prior abuse, but there's no way to tell if it was chronic. It's very sad. It's a very, very horrible thing to do to anybody, let alone a 6-year-old.
Yeah, it's unthinkable. It's unconscionable. Except to
a very bad person.
A psychotic sexual predator.
Now, some of the investigators believe that the scene was staged, including the vaginal trauma, to make it look like a kidnapping assault gone bad. At the time of the autopsy, the pathologist recorded that her vaginal area had been wiped with a cloth. And JonBenet also had bits of pineapple in her stomach. And there were pineapple pieces in a bowl of milk on the kitchen counter, and her brother Berg's fingerprints were on the bowl. If it was an intruder, there were no footprints outside. And if the basement window was the access point, there was a sizable cobweb and dirt on the window that should have been disturbed, but it wasn't. So the window might not have been the access point at all. Now, crime experts emphatically state that ransom kidnappings and child molesters don't overlap. Pedophiles do what they want to a child and then discard them. But a ransom kidnappers are in it for the money. They're not going to hurt the child. They're going to want their money, and they will give the child back.
Unless this is someone who had both desires and as an act of revenge against the family.
Well, a child has never been discovered in the family home with the presence of a ransom note like this ever before or since. Investigators specifically looked into this and had the FBI check their records for any similar case, and again, still the only case where this has happened. So let's talk about the ransom note, and we will do that after we take this quick break. All right, so the ransom note. All right, this is an exact. I'm going to quote the note word for word. Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We do respect your businesses, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché case to the bank. When you get home, you'll put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of the money and hence an earlier delivery pickup of your daughter. Any deviation of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. The two gentlemen watching over your daughter do not especially like you, so I advise you not to provoke them. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies. You will be scanned for electronic devices, and if any are found, she dies. You can try to deceive us, but be warned that we are familiar with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Follow our instructions, and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny as well as the authorities. Don't try to grow a brain, John. You are not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good Southern common sense of yours. It is up to you now, John. Victory, SBTC. Now, what do you make of all that? That's a very long-winded ransom note.
It sounds like it's someone who's familiar with the family and familiar with the with his
finances, right?
Yeah. Line of business.
Now, the note would have taken 20 minutes to write, and the paper that the note was written on came from Patsy's stationery set. So they did not write the note beforehand and bring it into the house with them. Somebody wrote this note in that house. And if you're a kidnapper, are you going to hang around in the house for 20 minutes writing a ransom note?
Not very likely.
No. There are also, now, handwriting experts differ on their opinions, but some believe that Patsy did write it. There are also similarities to the style of writing to Patsy's style, such as use of exclamation marks, acronyms, and indentation. The FBI told Boulder police that they'd never seen a 2.5-page ransom note either.
Huh.
Okay, so it was the longest ransom note in FBI history. So, did one of the Ramsey family accidentally kill her and try to cover it up? Or did an intruder get in with the intention of kidnapping her and maybe accidentally killed her? Two of the lead investigators in the case had opposing views. Lou Smith and Steve Thomas, both of them ultimately resigned. Smith, because he believed that the investigation had incompetently overlooked the intruder hypothesis, and Thomas because the district attorney's office had interfered with and failed to support the police investigation of the case. It needs to be noted that investigators did not separate the Ramseys to take their statements the day of the crime either, which is mind-boggling to me. It seems like a very basic thing, doesn't it?
Yes.
Now, years later, two detectives tried to meet with Burke Ramsey at his residence to see if he would sit down and talk to them. He refused, and later his lawyer told law enforcement not to contact him again. And John and Patsy themselves were very reluctant to give official interviews or information of any kind to the investigators, so they probably drove the point home to Burke to proceed the same way. A grand jury was convened on September the 15th, 1998, to consider indicting the Ramseys for charges relating to the case. But in 1999, the grand jury returned a true bill to charge the Ramseys with placing the child at risk in a way that led to her death and with obstructing an investigation of murder based on the probable cause standard applied to such grand jury proceedings. But the Boulder County District Attorney, Alex Hunter, did not prosecute them because he did not believe that he could meet the higher standard of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt that is required for a criminal conviction.
That can be a problem.
It can be a problem.
Yes. And yeah, possibly walking out on a limb that no prosecutor wants to walk on.
And we've seen these things fail. I was like, for example, in the Casey Anthony case, a lot of that was circumstantial evidence. There was nothing solid to ever prove that she killed her daughter, and I believe the district attorney did go for first-degree murder and was unable to prove it.
Yeah, and that means you've blown it.
It means you've blown it.
Yeah, overcharging can defeat a prosecutor.
Mary Lacey, the next Boulder County District Attorney, took over the investigation from the police on December 26th of 2002. She believes, based upon evidence in the suit, that it is more consistent with the theory that an intruder murdered JonBenet than it was that a family member did it. On July the 9th of 2008, the Boulder District Attorney's Office announced that as a result of newly developed DNA sampling and testing techniques, the Ramsey family members were excluded as suspects in the case, and she publicly exonerated the Ramseys. The unknown DNA from JonBenet's clothing is going to be the focus of the investigation, and until one can prove otherwise, the suspect is the donator of that unknown DNA. In 2016, Gordon Coombs, a former investigator for the Boulder County District Attorney's Office, also questioned total absolution of the Ramsey, stating, "We all shed DNA all the time. It can be deposited anywhere for various reasons that are benign. To clear somebody just on the premise of touch DNA, especially when you have a situation where the crime scene was not secure at the beginning, really is a stretch." Stephen E. Pitts, a forensic psychiatrist hired by Boulder authorities, said Lacey's public exoneration of the Ramseys was a big slap in the face to Chief Mark Beckner and the core group of detectives who had been working on the case for years. Which, I think that that's fair. I don't think that you can completely exonerate anybody in this situation.
No, they didn't really collect enough evidence to rule anyone out.
No. The Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner in 2009 announced that Stan Garrett, the new district attorney for Boulder, was turning the case over to his agency and that his team would resume investigating it. Now, the statute of limitations for the crimes identified in the 1999 grand jury bill had expired, and nobody pursued a review of the case against the Ramseys ever since then. And the case was reopened in 2010 as a cold case. New interviews were conducted following a fresh inquiry by a committee that included state and federal investigators. Police were expected to use the latest DNA technology in their investigation, but nothing new has come up since. Now, we are going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about the most likely suspects. Now, the suspect list is as follows. Patsy Ramsey. She may have accidentally murdered JonBenet in a fit of rage over a bedwetting accident and then covered it up. Now, Patsy was enjoying the good life, and she was a seemingly pleasant person. She was also influential in her community. She seemed to really love her daughter, and several pieces of evidence suggest that she may have had more to do with the crime than she let on. But whatever secret she knew about it, she took to the grave after she lost a 13-year battle with ovarian cancer that eventually spread to her brain. John Ramsey is another suspect. Linda Arndt, the first police officer to arrive at the scene, sent him to search the house for anything unusual, and she told him not to touch or remove anything, but he did. He destroyed vital evidence when he removed JonBenet's body from the basement and covered her with blankets. And Linda Arndt started to feel that perhaps Ramsey knew too much, and she has made no secret of her suspicions towards the family. She found other suspicious actions of theirs, like how John and Patsy let the 10 a.m. deadline in the ransom note slip by without a word. They didn't mention it to the police at all. And, that's very odd. That really sticks out to me. What about you?
Could it be that they simply had too much on their minds?
I don't know, man. I feel like if I were a parent, my child was kidnapped. Hell, if you were kidnapped, I would be sitting on top of my phone and staring at the clock. I would not have, 4 other people in my house just traipsing around.
Yeah, that's a valid point.
Now, she wasn't the only one who found his behavior that morning to be odd. A detective on the scene overheard John Ramsey making arrangements to fly the family to Atlanta just hours after the murder. Now, that is very, very suspicious. Why would you want to leave?
Yeah, leaving town.
Yeah, why would you want to leave town?
Yeah.
Now,
the very thing the police would tell a suspect not to do.
That's right. Now, innuendo of sexual abuse began to circulate, but there was no evidence that was ever found to prove those allegations. And there's just no history of it at all with John Ramsey. He had other daughters. Nobody ever said anything. And if you're a pedophile, you don't just decide out of the blue to molest a child one day. That just doesn't happen.
No. It's not a spontaneous thing.
No. Another suspect is Burke Ramsey, which I feel like there's a lot of lies and weirdness surrounding him, especially. John and Patsy Ramsey shielded him from the press for years after the murder. I mean, he was 9. He was 9 years old, so I could see why they would want to protect him as much as possible. When he was an adult, he did an interview on the Dr. Phil show, and he wanted to clear the air, and he grinned through the whole interview. And I don't like the fact that he was smiling during that interview. You're being asked about your dead sister and you're smiling about it? Come on.
Yeah, that is pretty bizarre. And that does cast suspicion upon the brother.
Now, soon after, CBS aired the case of JonBenet Ramsey, a 2-part documentary that reinvestigated the evidence of the crime with a select group of FBI and forensic experts. This included retired profiler Jim Clemente and former Scotland Yard behavioral analyst Laura Richards. And if you're a true crime aficionado, you've definitely heard of these people and you know who they are. Now, the documentary leaned their suspicions towards Burke Ramsey as close as they could without making any kind of formal accusation. The famed forensic investigator Werner Spitz's review of JonBenet's autopsy included a perfectly rectangular defect that he suspected came from the flashlight to her head. He claimed the flashlight fit the 8.5-inch gash in her skull to perfection. There was no trace evidence of either JonBenet or Burke found on the flashlight, but that could have been wiped down. Okay? Really could have been very easily. Yeah. Now, the flashlight becomes even more suspicious when you tie it to the pineapple that was found in JonBenet's stomach. Now, this theory suggests that JonBenet had taken a slice of fruit from Burke's snack, which might have led him to strike her with the flashlight out of anger. The wounds on her back, which were thought to have come from the stun gun, were also consistent with the edges of one of Burke's toy train tracks, which Werner Spitz suggested he might have been used by Burke to poke his sister's unconscious body for a response. Now, Burke shot back immediately after this. His attorney claimed that CBS perpetrated a fraud on its viewers. A $150 million lawsuit against Werner Spitz was filed for potentially defamatory statements that he made about Burke while promoting the special, and the lawyer said they are intent on suing CBS once a waiting period has passed. Now, it does need to be noted that Burke, at some point in his past, did strike JonBenet in the face with a golf club, and it was rumored that he had smeared his feces around JonBenet's bedroom. And the Ramseys had books in their home that were about dealing with angry, abusive children. The 911 call may have had Burke's voice on it. This is something else that is a lot of there's a lot of speculation surrounding this phone call. Now, Patsy did not hang up the phone completely when she was finished talking to the 911 operator, even though she thought she had. The dialogue at the end of the 911 call was an older male voice saying, "We're not speaking to you." And then a female voice saying, "Help me, Jesus, help me, Jesus." And then a younger male voice said, "Well, what did you find?" Another suspect is Gary Oliva. At the time, he was a 32-year-old and a known sex offender in Boulder, Colorado. He was a convicted pedophile, and he had been living in the area on and off when police allegedly found a magazine cutout of JonBenet Ramsey in his backpack after he was apprehended on drug charges in the year 2000. He was soon released, but suspicions remained. The family's private investigator, Ollie Gray, once referred to Oliva's ties to JonBenet as a bombshell arrest in the case and criticized the Boulder PD for failing to consider him as a more credible suspect. Gary Oliva's high school friend Michael Vale stepped forward with an allegation that supported Ollie Gray's suspicions. Vale claimed that not long after the murder, a distraught Oliva had called him on the phone and confessed to his longtime pal to have hurt a little girl. He says, "I have hurt a little girl." And Michael Vale was also unsettled by how the knots that were fashioned on the garrote were. He said that Oliva attempted to choke his mother with a telephone cord and tied knots in that similar manner. So it's also rumored to have a possible connections to a theory that links the marks found on JonBenet's body with the stun gun, as Oliva had one on him at the time of his arrest. Now, he has been cleared by DNA testing. He was recently charged with 2 counts of sexual exploitation of a child and possessing child pornography. He was last reported by the Denver Post to have been arrested and is being held on a $100,000 bond. Michael Helgoth is another suspect. He worked in a nearby auto salvage yard, and Ollie Gray tied him to a property dispute involving the Ramseys. The unidentified boot print found in the basement was similar to his, and he committed suicide in 1997, just 2 days after a press conference announcing that the Boulder DA was zeroing in on a new suspect. But he remained by DNA. He was cleared by DNA, and, well, he's dead. So if he's dead, you can't really ask him any questions. And in 2006, a former school teacher, John Mark Carr, confessed to the crime in graphic sexual detail. He was arrested in Thailand, where he'd been living after facing child pornography charges in the United States. He's now 51 years old, and he initially bought himself into the mess by reaching out to a University of Colorado professor named Michael Tracy over email in regards to a documentary that Michael Tracy was making on the case. Once those emails took a disturbing turn, it revealed the grown man's fascination with JonBenet. And Michael Tracy reported him to the police, who arrested him, but his confession did not match any of the details in the crime, and his DNA did not match the touch DNA that was, or the unidentified DNA found on JonBenet.
Yeah.
Now, another, and this is the another suspect that I've not really heard a whole lot of. Linda Hoffman Pugh had worked for the Ramseys as their housekeeper, and her husband was their handyman. This means that she would have had a key to the home, right? So access points. That was not the window. During the investigation of the murder, she did not fit the profile the police were after, but she voiced her suspicions that Patsy Ramsey had accidentally killed JonBenet. And Patsy told investigators that Linda Hoffman Pugh was struggling for money and had asked for a loan of several $1,000s, which the Ramseys declined. Police showed up at Pugh's home the night after the murder and asked her to write the number $118,000 on a piece of paper, took her fingerprints and several strands of her hair. She then testified in front of a grand jury for a total of 8 hours.
Wow.
Okay. Including a statement against Patsy that read, "I think she had multiple personalities. She'd be in a good mood, and then she'd be cranky. She got into arguments with JonBenet about wearing a dress or about a friend coming over. I had never seen Patsy so upset." Now, this theory asserts that the housekeeper led a trusting JonBenet into the basement that night in an attempt to trick her employers into leaving money for her ransom. It's also likely that she would have known about the $118,000 because she worked for that family, right? So that she would have known about that money. And the last suspect, and this is somebody I would hardly even call a suspect, Bill McReynolds, now deceased, was a friend of the Ramseys who had dressed up as Santa Claus the week before JonBenet's murder to entertain the neighborhood children at the Christmas parties. The possibility that the now deceased McReynolds had anything to do with JonBenet's death is extremely unlikely. It was rumored that he paid a little too much attention to JonBenet. Supposedly he had chosen her to be his special friend. She had gifted him a vial of gold glitter, and he bought it with him when he was having heart surgery, and he requested that the glitter be mixed with his ashes upon his death. But this really just feels like character assassination of just a kind, friendly old man. To me, that's what this feels like. And Mark Beckner, who at one point was the chief of police for Boulder, Colorado, emphasized that he does not fully know what happened that night or who killed her. Some people believe he does know, but I don't think he does know. I don't think he knows any more than any of us do. And he said if anyone did know, he said this would not be a mystery. Dismissing the intruder evidence is a mistake because of the location of the foreign DNA is significant. He thinks that this could very likely be the person who killed JonBenet, but they will not be sure until and if they find out who it belongs to. He also stated that just because they couldn't prove a point of entry does not mean that someone didn't find a way to get in. And that's it in a nutshell. There's so many rabbit holes you can go down with this case. There's body language experts that have analyzed the Ramsey's interviews. There's a whole website devoted to the ransom note that breaks it down line by line. Again, it's kind of like, like with the Kennedy assassination, where you could just spend all your time reading about it or watching videos on it.
I think there's actually more avenues to look down than the Kennedy assassination.
Maybe so.
And to me, given all the circumstantial evidence involved here, this looks more complicated than the Kennedy assassination, which of course sounds crazy on the surface, but this whole case
it's twisty and turning.
There's
a lot of
chaotic rabbit hole.
Chaotic rabbit hole, exactly. There's a lot of dead ends. It's like just when I'm almost embarrassed to admit how much space this has occupied my brain over the years. And, as humans, we don't like things that are unsolved, right? We don't like to have a puzzle that's unfinished. And this is one of those puzzles that might never be finished. A lot of law enforcement experts don't believe that this case will ever be solved.
Unfortunately, they're probably right.
Yeah, they're probably right. We are almost 26 years into, it was almost 26 years ago. Do you believe that? 26 years ago. And we still see little JonBenet's face staring out at us from the cover of the National Enquirer. Don't we?
Yes.
Yes.
It's still a murky swamp.
Very much so.
That it has not been drained.
No.
It seems no matter what, we're never going to get a clear picture.
Probably not. Well, dear listeners, I really hope that you enjoyed our final episode of the year. Really wish you a very happy holiday, however you celebrate. We hope that good things come to you in 2023. And happy holidays. Be safe, be kind, and don't drive drunk. Do not do that. Call an Uber.
or call a lift,
or call a lift,
or
have a designated driver,
or
whichever.
Get on a bus if you can, or a streetcar.
Get on a bus or a streetcar. Is that what you said?
Or even call a friend.
Yes, call a friend, somebody, anybody. Don't you get behind the wheel yourself.
Or if you can, don't be too embarrassed to call your parents.
Yeah, that too. Call your parents.
Yeah.
So, Brian, do you have anything else to say?
This case will never get old, never get boring. It will never lose its legs because it has too many legs.
Has too many legs.
Far too many legs. It's perplexing. It's mind-boggling.
It is.
It's impossible to figure this out. I've had a variety of theories myself on this case, and at every turn I was convinced I was correct, and then realized
you're not correct.
That it just seems like any one of these people involved could have done it. It makes it so perplexing.
Yeah, I know. It's again, it's a puzzle, right? It's like it's like a Rubik's cube, and I was never good at solving Rubik's cubes, but that's not really the point here. But it is like that.
That's a very good analogy. It's but more specifically Rubik's cube, it's more like a Hellraiser box.
Oh yeah, one of those.
Yeah.
All right, dear listeners, be safe, be kind. Remember that we're all human beings. Hug your family, love your family, unless you don't talk to your family, which is perfectly valid if you don't. And, of course, don't park next to vans.
And if it's dark, it's dangerous, and you don't feel safe, don't be there in the first place. Don't start down the rabbit hole when you can avoid it altogether. And if you are talking to a member of law enforcement in a professional capacity, even on Christmas Day, and you are not the victim or the witness to a crime, you lawyer up. Better call Saul.